In the second part of this series, I will continue to research places from the long list I had that viewers brought to my attention in comments and/or sent me pictures and information. I'm going to start with comments that were made in response to part 1 of this series because they expose more of the same types of patterns that I saw in part 1. My name is Michelle Gibson. After I talked about hippodromes, racing tracks, and proximity to international airports in part 1, a viewer brought to my attention in a comment that the Montreal Hippodrome is located next to rails, is 15 minutes to the Montreal Pierre Trudeau International Airport, and the St. Lawrence River is just south of it. The Montreal Hippodrome was located 8 miles or 13 kilometers from the Montreal International Airport, or a driving distance of 11 miles or 18 kilometers from there. The location of the historical Montreal Hippodrome appears to be situated at a similar angle to major international airports as seen in Shepherd's Bush in West London and Sulphur Springs in Tampa, shown and discussed in the first part of this series, where both places had elliptical-shaped racetracks in their vicinities. Also known as the Blue Bonnets Raceway, a thoroughbred horse racing track and casino, the Montreal Hippodrome was permanently closed in October of 2009 after 137 years of operation, and the abandoned site was demolished starting in 2018. The Hippodrome was located right next to the Canadian Pacific St. Luc rail yards, and it's interesting to note this array of elliptical shapes on the racetrack grounds between the main ellipse and the rail yards. It is also interesting to note that the roundhouse at the St. Luc rail yards was said to have been completed in 1950, and by 2003 it was reduced to 4 or 5 stalls. Why was a beautiful structure like this deconstructed after only a half-century of use? The appearance of the historical St. Luc roundhouse reminded me of depictions I have seen of the ancient harbor of Carthage in Tunisia, called a kothon, meaning an artificial protected harbor. This is a 2017 photo of the former grand 37-stall roundhouse, considered a shining example of the Canadian Pacific Railway when it was built. Studies and planning have been done to redevelop the Hippodrome site into social housing units. The Hippodrome is located in the western part of Montreal's Côte des Neiges neighborhood, which is the geographic center of the island of Montreal, said to have been founded in 1862. And is also the location of the Notre Dame des Neiges Cemetery, as well as the nearby St. Joseph's Oratory, the construction of which was said to have started in 1914 and completed in 1967. St. Joseph's Oratory is the highest building in Montreal, a national shrine, a Roman Catholic minor basilica, the largest church in Canada, and has one of the largest domes in the world. Like Shepherd's Bush in West London, the Côte des Neiges neighborhood is an underground transportation hub with 5 Orange Line metro stops and 4 on the Blue Line. Another place I would like to bring your attention to before I move on is in Philadelphia. I decided to take a peek at Philadelphia, another place I have studied on a map previously, and I knew the Philadelphia International Airport was in the southwestern part of the city. So I looked at it on Google Earth and proceeded to look for an elliptical shape nearby to see if I could find one. I came across this elliptical track northeast of the airport, which I was able to identify by looking up tracks in South Philadelphia. The South Philadelphia Super Site is located 4 miles or 7 kilometers in a straight line from the Philadelphia International Airport and is a driving distance of 6 miles or 10 kilometers. Here's a comparison of the appearance of all 4 of these locations I have looked at with an elliptical racetrack and relatively short distance to a major international airport. The South Philadelphia Sports Complex is adjacent to the South Philadelphia Super Site, and which consists of Citizens Bank Park, the home of baseball's Philadelphia Phillies, the Lincoln Financial Field, the home of football's Philadelphia Eagles, and the Wells Fargo Center, the home of basketball's Philadelphia 76ers, and hockey's Philadelphia Flyers, and the sport of lacrosse's Philadelphia Wings. The South Philadelphia Super Site track and the 3 professional sports venues are both located very close to the CSX rail yards, below which I noticed there was an abandoned elliptical shape surrounded by trees. When I looked on a map, the railroad and sports complexes in South Philadelphia are adjacent to the Philadelphia Naval Yard, the location of the Philadelphia experiment. A couple of thoughts before I move on from here. First, I have long wondered about a connection between athletic fields to the Earth's grid system, since finding ball fields sandwiched between a starport called Fort Negley and the railroads in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm definitely beginning to think ellipses served a function similar to starports as circuitry on the Earth's electromagnetic grid system. Secondly, for a variety of reasons, I have come to believe that the Philadelphia experiment was part of how the Earth's original positive timeline was hijacked, which I have talked in depth about in other videos. And if that belief sounds out there, there is actually a time-traveling naval vessel in the field of information in the form of the 1980 movie The Final Countdown. I am wondering if Philadelphia was a very powerful node even amongst the network of electrical power node points around the world, or if its location was the key for something like this to take place, or both. One last thing before moving on from this particular topic for now. A viewer sent me this graphic a while back saying, if you haven't yet researched the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I think it's worth a glance. Balloon racing and monorail airplanes being used before they were racing cars. Check this out. Vatican City, the Wimbledon campus, the Roman Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, Yankee Stadium, and the Kentucky Derby all fit inside what is called the automobile racing circuit. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the largest sports venue in the world and said to have been constructed in 1909. It was said to be the second purpose-built banked oval racing circuit after Brooklands in Surrey, England, which opened in 1907 and closed in 1939. It certainly looks like the controllers utilized the existing performance-enhancing features of the physical infrastructure of the Earth's grid system for the sporting venues of the new historical timeline. Someone mentioned the Battersea Power Station on the south bank of the River Thames in Battersea in the London borough of Wandsworth. The one building comprises two power stations, with Power Station A said to have been constructed between 1929 and 1935, and Power Station B between 1937 and 1941. One of the largest brick buildings in the world, and known for its Art Deco. Then after all that work to design and construct it, both power stations of the Battersea Power Station were decommissioned by 1983, only 42 years later. After 30 years of abandonment, interest in the redevelopment of the site picked up, and it is currently being turned into luxury apartments, office space, and commercial business space. Someone mentioned the Efteling amusement park, located in the North Brabant province of the Netherlands, with the largest nearby city being called Hertogenbosch, also known as Den Bosch. Sounds like Shepherd's Bush and Busch Gardens, as noted in London and Tampa in the first part of this series. The Efteling amusement park was opened in 1952 on the grounds of what was a former sports and recreational park under the guidance, we are told, of three visionary men who developed the park. Amusements at the park include the King's Castle of the Symbolica ride, a trackless dark family ride, with a grand ballroom at the end of the ride, the Villa Volta, an unusual type of ride in which the visitors get the illusion while inside that either the building or the visitors, or both, are turned upside down, and the Fata Morgana, also known as the Forbidden City, and the 1001 Arabian Nights, an attraction that opened in 1986. I have to wonder if the infrastructure for the park was already there. Another place with a theme park that a commenter brought to my attention was in Chippewa Lake in Medina, Ohio, which was at the end of a trolley line that came from Cleveland. It operated for 100 years, from 1878 to 1978, after which time it was abandoned, with many of the original rides left to deteriorate in situ. The Chippewa Park Dance Hall burned down in June of 2002. A viewer from Belgium commented about the Antwerp Zoo, one of the oldest in the world as it was established on July 21st of 1842, and is located right next to the Antwerp Central Railway Station, which first opened in 1905. The following are some of the architectural features of the Antwerp Zoo. The Egyptian Temple, said to date from 1856, which houses the giraffes. The Moor Temple, said to date from 1885, which houses okapis, known as forest giraffes, and the world's first zoo with okapis starting in 1918. The Reptile Building, said to date from 1901. And the Winter Garden, a tropical garden dated to 1897. The Belgian viewer also mentioned the Albert Canal, connecting Antwerp and Liège, which was said to have been built first by a German engineering company between 1930 and 1934, and then completed by Belgian companies by 1939. Just in time for the German forces to cross the Albert Canal on May 11th of 1940, the destruction of Fort Eben-Emael, and the beginning of the German occupation of Belgium. Along with Fort Eben-Emael, near the border with the Netherlands, the national redoubt included the fortified position of Liège, at the other end of the Albert Canal from Antwerp. The Belgian government was said to have upgraded and extended the already existing infrastructure of the fortified position of Liège after World War I to block Germany's invasion corridor through Belgium to France. This was done after World War I because the Belgians were able to hold up the German forces invading France for a week at Liège, which in turn affected the German timetable for invading France. Interestingly, the Belgian King Leopold III declared Belgium's neutrality in 1936 to try to prevent another conflict, which was said to prevent France from making active use for its defense of the Belgian defenses and territory, and as seen with Fort Eben-Emael, the Belgian fortifications did not hold the Germans, who occupied Belgium and France for at least 4 years during World War II. Liège is one of the most important railway hubs in Belgium, with its first station opening in 1842, and in 1843 becoming the location of the first international railway connection linking Liège to Aachen and Cologne in Germany. There was even a World's Fair held in Liège in 1905. This is the Liège-Guillemans railway station, which opened in 2009, one of 4 Belgian stations on the high-speed rail network. The fortified position of Nemour of the Belgian National Redoubt was said to have been established for the same reason as the fortified position of Liège, to fortify the traditional invasion corridor of Germany through Belgium to France. The old forts here were said to have been built between 1888 and 1892. The Siege of Nemour took place in World War I between August 20th and August 25th of 1914, when the German army bombarded and destroyed the forts with heavy artillery. I think quite likely Star forts were targeted for destruction in both world wars, and other wars as well, and not because they were military fortifications. During the siege, the German army captured the Nemour citadel, and Nemour was occupied by the German army for the rest of World War I. Nemour is situated at the confluence of the Meuse and Sambre rivers, which reminded me in appearance of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, at the forks of the Ohio, where the Ohio and Monongahela rivers meet. I am really quite sure that what we are told are natural river systems are in fact man-made canal systems. Interestingly, Nemour was also the name of the Montreal Underground stop next to the former Montreal Hippodrome. This is a synchronistic finding because I didn't coordinate this information before I started doing the research for this video. I am just finding things as I go. The most important part of the Belgian National Redoubt, we are told, was the double ring of defensive fortifications around the port city of Antwerp. During World War I, the Germans also laid siege to Antwerp against Belgian, French, and British forces. The Germans were again victorious after bombarding the so-called Belgian fortifications with heavy and super-heavy artillery. During World War II, the British Armoured 11th Division captured the port city of Antwerp intact on September 4th of 1944, except for the bridges across the Albert Canal. Apparently, the retreating Germans blew up these bridges on their way out of town. Then, on October 12th of 1944, Hitler and the German High Command exclusively focused their V-weapon missile attacks on the cities of Antwerp and London, and for a period of 175 days and nights, German missile launching crews fired more than 4,000 V-1s and more than 1,000 V-2s at Greater Antwerp, and Antwerp had become known as the City of Sudden Death. The Antwerp Underground is known as the Ruïne, and here there are vaulted ceilings, narrow canals, bridges, sewers, and sluices. It is interesting to note that Antwerp is not located too far from the Efteling amusement park, being only 51 miles or 82 kilometers apart from each other. Other places on my list of places suggested by commenters include Silith Harbour and Beach in Cumbria, a northwest county in England near the country's border with Scotland. Silith Beach is located on England's Solway coast, which is designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty in Cumbria. Silith Harbour and Beach was said to have been inspired by Carlisle businessmen in the 1850s as a deep-water port, seaside resort, and railway hub. Carlisle, the administrative centre of Cumbria, at one time had 7 railway companies operating out of the Carlisle railway station, which was said to have first opened in 1847. Silith Port, one of the busiest ports in Cumbria, is clearly man-made, with old-looking walls. Its main cargoes are wheat, molasses, fertilizer, and general cargo. Carr's flour mill is located right next to the port, called a Victorian-era mill that was said to have been built in 1887, and still provides flour to leading food manufacturers. Silith was called a planned community, and we are told that the railway company even had grey granite shipped here in its own vessels from Northern Ireland for the Christ Church, a prominent landmark in Silith, occupying a complete rectangle of the planned town, and its construction completed in 1870. The Silith Green is considered to be one of the largest and longest greens in England, going back to the 1860s, and is fronted by the Silith Promenade along the shoreline heading up the Solway coast towards Skinburness. Skinburness is considered a residential area for Silith, and its most prominent building, the Skinburness Hotel, said to have opened in the 1880s, was demolished in 2017, after having been abandoned for about 10 years. Another commenter pointed out the similarity between the architecture of Shipstone's Brewery in Nottingham, England, founded in 1852 on the left, and the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in St. Louis, Missouri, on the right, first established as the Bavarian Brewery, also in 1852. Both breweries are famous for their Clydesdales, a Scottish breed of draft horse. Someone else drew my attention to a place called Jenitze in Dresden, Germany. Come to find out, Jenitze was formerly a tobacco and cigarette factory, which was said to have been built between 1907 and 1909 and designed by architect Marvin Hamich in Moorish Revival style. Often confused for a mosque by tourists, we are told that no, it's not a mosque. It was just the clever way that the architect designed the factory as an Art Deco, mosque-inspired structure, because according to Dresden law at the time, we are told, it was prohibited to build factory buildings that might spoil the city's Baroque skyline. Jewish entrepreneur Hugo Zeitz started the tobacco company, which imported tobacco from Ottoman Jenitze in Thrace, which is now Genesea, Greece. The bombing of Dresden took place between February 13th and 15th of 1945, with more than 1,200 bombers of the British and American Air Forces dropping more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the capital of the German state of Saxony. These attacks destroyed more than 1,600 acres, or 6.5 kilometers squared, of the city center, and as many as 25,000 people were believed to have been killed. I'm going to continue this series in interesting comments I have received Redux, Part 2B of All Over the Map.